Coming up on this week's show, the Nintendo 64 gets reimagined.
Hogs of War is back.
And we chat to the man behind the legendary SCUMM Engine, Aric Wilmunder.
And the Retro Hour podcast is brought to you every week with our incredible friends at Bitmap Books. Now, have you seen their brand new book, perfect for October? From Ants to Zombies, 6 decades of video game horror, delving in to the remarkable history of games that terrify and delight in equal measure, launching on Halloween. So you can check that out and the rest of their retro gaming collection at bitmapbooks.com. Hello and welcome to the Retro Hour podcast, episode number 400, your weekly dose of retro gaming and technology news with me, Dan Wood.
Me, Ravi Abbott.
And me, Joe Fox.
And I think we need a bit more excitement. Episode 400, boys!
I knew the sound effects would come out.
Have some champagne, Joe. Set the fireworks off on the lawn at the front as well. 400 episodes of this little podcast that we started. We were trying to work it out, weren't we? It was January 2016 when we launched this podcast, thinking, I remember Ravi and I saying, we'll do maybe 2 or 3 episodes, see how it goes. And here we are almost 8 years later and 400 episodes of this show out there in cyberspace, covering the news every single week. And of course, the guests that we've had on as well. I mean, we're not going to get too self-indulgent this week, hopefully, but I think, it is nice to have a little celebration when we do reach a benchmark like 400.
Yeah, it's absolutely mental. I remember when we were walking and Dan turned around to me and he was just like, should we do a podcast? I was like, oh, isn't podcasting dying a bit? They don't seem to be like that big anymore. And yeah, let's just go for it. We both like radio. And Joe joined us. And yeah, 400 episodes later, many years as well. It's pretty crazy. And, I can't believe some of the guests we've had on as well. Some of these people giving us their time and it's pretty amazing. And also, trusting us to be able to come on and tell their story and not kind of, go for the drama and the hype and just tell the kind of story from their perspective, which I really enjoy. Yeah,
I think, the fact that the incredible caliber of people that we've had on the show as well, people that I never dreamed I get to speak to when I was a kid, sitting there in my bedroom playing video games by some people who not only we've had on the podcast, but actually regard as friends now as well. It's just been an incredible journey through the last 400 episodes. And of course, we want to say a big thank you to you as well for tuning in every single week. There'd be no point in doing this without our incredible audience. Big thanks to our incredible sponsors as well who make it all possible. And don't know about you guys, here's to 400 more.
Yeah,
absolutely.
That's it. How many grey hairs will we have by then?
I've already got a fair few.
Yeah. But yeah, it's just incredible hanging out with you guys every week as well. And the events we get to go to, all around the world as well, made possible thanks to this little podcast that we do every single week. So it's just been amazing. Now, you might remember over the last couple of weeks, we kind of opened the doors, didn't we? And said, if you want to come on the show and maybe leave us a little message, I actually set up a voicemail line. Now, we have been quite overwhelmed, I think is probably the word. We've had loads of these. So, honestly, a massive thank you. I had no idea that we get this many, if I'm honest. And I could play them all back to back now, but I think that will probably take up around 8 minutes of the podcast. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of break them up, play a few at the start, a few just ones I've randomly selected. We'll do a few in about half an hour, and then I'll play the rest of them out at the end of the podcast as well. So you guys want to hear a few voicemails now?
Yeah, man. Let's do it.
Go for it.
Hello, Retro Hour. My name is Stephen Goodwin, author of Grumpy Manager, Die Hard Vendetta, and more recently the book 20 Go to 10. Congratulations to me, Dan Wood, me, Ravi Abbott, and me, Joe Fox, for making it to 400 episodes. I personally didn't think they'd get past 329, but that's because I was on episode 329. Thanks again for having me on the show, and I look forward to 2043, when my recent games will be old enough to be considered retro. And hopefully I'll be allowed back on the show. Bye for now.
Guys, I've been listening to this podcast since episode 1. It's absolutely brilliant. Some of my favourite episodes have been the ones where you've interviewed the 8-bit musicians, the ones that dealt with the old school sound chips. I'd love it if you could get Yuzo Koshiro on there, but you've had the classics from the C64 era and the Spectrum era and that. And, you know what I mean? Keep doing it. Keep going for it. I fucking love it. I don't know if I can swear, but I just did. Anyway, you go for it, guys. I'm Jason Manchester, by the way. Take it easy.
Congratulations, Retro Hour Podcast. Oh, my goodness. God bless you, gentlemen. And you too, Dan. Thanks so much for being the best podcast of all time. You guys are the ones that started me listening to podcasts. It was the very first episode of the Retro Hour Podcast. That was the first podcast I ever listened to, and you are still my absolute favorite of all time. I listen to every single episode. God bless you guys for your longevity and your tenacity. I am so happy to be celebrating your 400th episode with you.
Oh, congratulations on reaching such an amazing milestone. It's so inspirational how you guys find the time and enthusiasm to create such a consistently great podcast. Fantastic job.
Don't know about you guys, but I'm grinning like a Cheshire cat.
Yeah,
already.
You know what? It made me go. I don't know. You know when you feel a bit not embarrassed, but like I proper looked down, smiling, like kind of like chuckling to myself. They were really, really lovely. They were, and
you got a bit shy, Jeff.
Yeah, a bit shy. Really put it into a perspective for me. Really, that was amazing.
No, but yeah, thank you so much. More of those on the way in just a bit. So if you have left us one, now you'll hear it very soon. Now we have to think of obviously an incredible guest to join us for our 400th episode as well. And you all know that I'm a massive point-and-click adventure game fan, grew up playing those. We've done several episodes with, legends from Sierra, LucasArts, Lucasfilm, and today, I think this one is probably the most in-depth interview we've ever done. Very fitting for what is going to be not only our 400th episode, but actually we're going to continue this next week as well, because it's a massive, epic 2-hour interview this week, isn't it, Ravi?
Yeah, I don't think we could have fit like the history of this into one episode, so we had to go for 2. And my God, this is just such a good interview because, we've talked about the SCUMM Engine and we've talked about the games in the SCUMM Engine on this podcast quite a lot, and we've got the co-creator here, Aric Wilmunder, the Scum Lord, as he's actually known.
Yes.
And man, he basically worked with Ron Gilbert, and they created the SCUMM Engine, which has been a huge part of the development of point-and-click adventures, also adventure titles. And this is, from Zach McCracken and the Alien Mindbenders in 1988, going all the way to 1997. Which is pretty amazing to have an engine that's developed that long to the final game, which was The Curse of Monkey Island. And there's titles like Loom in there, The Dig, Full Throttle, which is one of my favorites as well, Maniac Mansion, just so many. It's mind-bending to kind of go on this interview and talk to Aric, like some of the people that he's worked with as well, Spielberg and... just hearing the history of it and also his opinions on Sierra and stuff. A really, really interesting interview.
Yeah, and it made all those games you mentioned there possible. I mean, obviously, it stands for Script Creation Utility for Maniac Mansion. It said started in 1987 and was used for, over a decade. And then the fact that the SCUMM Engine made all of those incredible point-and-click adventure games possible and was ported to so many different platforms as well. I mean, I've been looking at the list of platforms that the SCUMM Engine ran software on. It was, 3DO, Amiga, Apple II, Atari ST, Commodore 64 even, the Mac, the NES, DOS, Mega CD, TurboGrafx 16. And even today, we've got stuff like, SCUMM VM that lets you play all these classic games on so many different platforms. Obviously, we kind of get into that with him as well. So the first half is going to be kind of, the history kind of setting up of the creation of the SCUMM Engine, and then the second half will go really into the games. So an incredible guest to celebrate our 400th episode, probably our most in-depth interview we've ever done with Aric Wilmunder. He's coming up on the show in around half an hour from now. But otherwise, it is business as usual. And the way that this podcast works, first half of it, we like to bring you up to speed on what's been happening in the world of retro gaming and technology from over the last 7 days. And, oh my word, this has been absolutely everywhere on my timeline. Every time I open Facebook, I'm seeing this everywhere over the last couple of days. People have been sharing it with us on Discord. I've seen it on Reddit as well. And it looks like we're getting a new version of the Nintendo 64 because Nintendo weren't going to give it to us, so leave it to Analog to do it instead.
Yeah, this looks really interesting. So Analog's next project which is going to be due in early 2024, is going to be a hardware-accurate emulated Nintendo 64 replica, is the headline. I keep seeing
now,
everywhere.
I'm waiting, because this is FPGA based, and you're going to get people going, well, it's not emulation. You always get that argument.
Well, this is the thing. So my understanding of the analog consoles is, they are, I was going to say original hardware. They're not original hardware. As you said, they're FPGA, so it's not emulation. You use original cartridges in there, and it's all 4K and HDMI and all that kind of stuff, and there's no ROM files involved. I guess there is if you use an EverDrive and stuff like that. And they're region free, and they've already said this is going to be region free, so it will use it'll play all types of N64 cartridges, which is really cool. They haven't revealed the look of it or the controller yet. They've done like a little kind of shadowed out snippet of the controller.
It's very teasery, isn't it?
Yeah. I've got a feeling they're not going to do, the old kind of Trident three-prong N64 controller. I think they're going to do a more, a modern kind of style controller. I know you can, in the picture they have revealed, the tease, as you say, Ravi, is literally the top right of the controller.
So you can't actually see if there's a middle prong in there, can you? It's just kind of...
It could be hidden in the dark, I guess. But this system it's a console. It's going to be called the Analog 3D. And the tagline is, "The future is here, 64 bits of pleasure." And like you said then, Joe, it's they've revealed some of the specs already, wireless Bluetooth and 2.4G, 4 original style controller ports on it as well.
That's good.
So it will work with the original controllers by the sound of it.
Wicked.
Completely re-engineered in FPGA, uses the Analog OS. No emulation in there as well, but what I really like about this is it's not so much like a straight copy of the N64. They've also enhanced it too, so it is a reimagining of the system, including some new display modes as well, including 4K resolution. So basically, play your N64 games upscale to 4K on your modern TV.
But it's also got original display modes as well. So what you can do is select the display mode, and I think they've definitely beat Nintendo to this one, and it's always been hard to emulate the N64. I remember it took ages for the emulators to kind of get it going. Like Mario 64 seemed to be one of those titles that everybody could do, but the compatibility on other stuff, some of the rare titles, it was really tough. And from what I hear, with the Analog Pocket and the Super NT, Analog are just really good at this. They know what they're doing, and they say 100% compatibility, and that will happen. It's not one of these kind of hype things. This company has such a good reputation of creating these devices, and they often look really beautiful as well. The Analog Pocket, from what I saw, it looks absolutely amazing. I've never actually used any analog products myself. Have you guys ever had one in your hands?
No, I've not used any of them. You guys know me. I'm very old school.
Original hardware.
You don't need this HDMI.
Yeah, RF on my N64 at the moment. You're not even wrong there. So I've not played them, but I know they're highly regarded, especially the Analog Pocket. Whenever we're looking to do news and stuff like that, I always see pretty much every week something about the Analog Pocket being praised, or something else has been ported to it that plays, really, really well and stuff. So it is exciting to see, the Nintendo 64 being done. It's interesting because, obviously they're saying, without any of the performance problems or rendering inaccuracies of the N64. So it'll be interesting to see, if the draw distances have improved at all in any of the games like Body Harvest or anything like that, or even if they have a smear vision on there that you can turn on.
I think that will be the probably the original mode, and then it'd be amazing to see smear vision, as you put it, in 4K.
Well, it looks like as well those original display modes. They've used classic PVM's CRT displays as a reference point. So basically, it's going to emulate what it looked like on a PVM on a modern display.
That's cool.
Which I think is going to be quite interesting to see, because that's the thing, isn't it? Even when you play N64 games on the Switch, some of them have problems on there, with Nintendo's own emulation. So the fact that this is like a proper FPGA reinterpretation of the N64 with, what looks like a modern style controller that works with modern displays as well. Because, it does feel like whenever, we talk about mini consoles, that seems to be the one thing everyone wants, isn't it? Like an N64 Mini. That does kind of lead me to my next point, which is how much do you think this is going to cost? Because I've got a feeling it's probably going to be more than, one of the mini consoles, for example.
Yeah, I think aren't these usually like kind of like £300-400? They're pretty expensive, aren't they, when they come out? So I won't be surprised. A lot of these kind of like, even just the replica consoles, which are in 4K, tend to be on the new console kind of price-wise side of things.
They're kind of the high quality ones, though, aren't they?
Yeah, like, absolutely.
For that 100% accuracy. And I can imagine even having your N64, all your original stuff, and then the games would be expensive, but also having, adapters on the back and stuff. I can imagine that gets quite expensive, but not near that. But, it sounds good if it's a good solution. And I think you might have add-ons in there. People can just like virtually add like memory expansions and stuff. It's going to be great to see what happens.
Yeah, absolutely. I think just having a new N64 that's easy to hook up to a modern display looks good, which is like half the battle already won, I think. So looks like there's not long to wait for that. So if you want to check out the little teaser so far, I will link that in our show notes as well. Now, something else from back in the day that is back for 2023, or maybe 2024, actually. This is running as a Kickstarter at the moment, and it's literally just started at the time of recording this. I think we're about 2 days in, but already they've reached over £20,000 at the time of recording, and rightly so as well, because this is an official remaster of Hogs of War.
Yeah, man. Hogs of War Lardcore. This is called.
Nice.
And it's being developed by Urban Scran, which will be really interesting. And it's what caught my attention about it immediately when I first clicked on this, because I saw this last night. A friend of ours posted it, and I saw this, and they are using Rick Mail, his original dialogue and all the original soundtrack and stuff like that. So straight,
it wouldn't be the game without him.
Yeah, it wouldn't have been, exactly. So straight away, I was like, that's amazing, kind of thing. Like, and at first I wasn't sure if it was a sequel or if it was a remake reimagining, but it is more of a remake reimagining. But I'm all for, a new Hogs of War. Like you say, it is on Kickstarter, £20,000 so far of their £150,000 target. Which would mean the game will come out on PS4 and PS5. Stretch targets for like Xbox and PC and stuff like that. They've actually got a lot of stretch targets all the way up to £1 million, interestingly. Wow. But they only need 150,000. I say only 150,000 for it to happen, which, fingers crossed it does happen, because I was a big fan of Hogs of War growing up, but always found it really difficult. So it'd be nice to revisit it and see if I can do it as an adult.
Because there was a PlayStation release and a PC release as well, wasn't there?
Yeah.
And I found it was one of these games that got overshadowed by stuff like Worms 3D and stuff, and it got a real cult following because it was just really good fun. And the whole kind of history of Gremlin and stuff, it's really nice to kind of see this title getting redone. And I think it deserves this, and it deserves a bit more appreciation as well, because it was massively underrated. But anybody who collected PS1 stuff, you'd turn around and go, oh yeah, Hogs of War, that's great.
Yeah and I think you've hit the nail on the head there. A lot of my friends, who are into games, not necessarily retro games, or just kind of had a PS1 back in the day and stuff like that, a lot of them will bring up Hogs of War, and it's interesting because it's not got any sequels. The legacy is it was a one-off game, for PS1 and PC 25 years ago. But so many people talk about it, and it's just like you say, it seems to be like it doesn't get a lot of love, and maybe it just doesn't get a lot of love outside of the UK.
And it was a time where camera angles were also, they could make or ruin a game. And people were just kind of getting used to that, and I think they cracked it with Hogs of War. I remember playing some of the older titles like Lemmings 3D and stuff, and it was just a nightmare for me.
I can. some of the games, didn't do too well. I mean, obviously this was an original IP, luckily, so it wasn't something that was 2D and then, they transitioned to 3D, but I think they did pretty well with, it's that kind of like, when is it? What is it? 98, 97, Hogs of War. So they did pretty well with the 3D on it. One thing I will say, I don't know about you guys, but I really, really, really had to look through the Kickstarter to find out what console it was actually on.
Yeah.
I found it in the FAQs.
It's laid out really fancy, isn't it? But it's not the easiest to follow, the Kickstarter.
Yeah, so, by any chance, anybody who's involved in it is listening, that was my biggest kind of like, I was like, what console is this actually for? Because this is really exciting. And then one of the comments was pretty much some of the comments in the comment section I was reading through earlier today were saying, maybe try and, it seems aimed towards the Hogs of War fans, which are out there, but I don't know how they would do this, but if you could try and aim it to the wider audience, maybe it would do better, but I don't know how they would do that with such a kind of like, it is a bit of a cult game. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, but looking at it as well, like it was all about the gameplay. Like the original landscape was just completely bare, compared to what they've got now with like, the shader graphics and all the kind of more cartoony, deliberate style that they're putting in there. It's going to be quite a different game, I think. And new audience, kids might pick this up, and if they really have good fun with it, then it might grow, and you might get another.
I'm looking at the team behind it as well. Interestingly, there's quite a few of the former Gremlin team behind it, including Ian Stewart, the former CEO of Gremlin, actually runs this company by the sounds of it, Urban Scan.
Excellent. Based
in Sheffield as well. So it's, I think, I've got every faith that they're going to deliver a really good product. So, and the fact that it's, already reached that amount of money in just like the first 24 hours, pretty much over 20 grand. I'm pretty confident it's going to make it. So if you want to back that on Kickstarter, that is available now, and I'll put that in this week's show notes. Now, I was nearly a bit late recording the podcast this week, because you guys were like, we're ready. I was actually in my other room playing this free Frasier RPG. Now, I'm talking about, Frasier as in the TV series. I know it's actually back again, isn't it? I know you've been checking out the new series.
So I'm a big Frasier fan, to the point of when Frasier kind of died, I was wearing a Frasier t-shirt going around, and people were loving it. And I've seen the new series, and I do recommend it. I think it's very funny. Some of the critics haven't been the biggest fans, but I think it's a good return, and it's got a good foundation. But this is based on the older Frasier series, isn't it? Not the new version.
Well, this is an RPG game that you can play for free through your web browser, actually, called Frasier Fantasy, and also it works on the Analog Pocket and the Game Boy Color as well. Have you played this, Joe?
I haven't. I did always enjoy Frasier. But what's quite interesting about this is the guy who, kind of came up with the concept. He just did a little Photoshop mock-up of the box artwork, and then he did that 4 years ago. And then he was him who's I found the tweet of where he's like, "Oh my god, somebody actually made this into a game," which is just absolutely brilliant. And I know Ravi, like you say, you're a really big Frasier fan, and I do remember when Frasier finished. I remember watching the final.
People used to take the mick. They used to put PS1 Frasier covers and stuff, and fake all these kind of games coming. So it's good to see it coming out on the Game Boy Color as well, which is interesting kind of format to choose it, because the way that they've done it is it's a bit like an RPG, but then they've also got these huge pictures, and I must say, Frasier does look well creepy when you kind of start it. He's got a sinister look in his eyes, but it is quite a good fun. It's in a Zelda kind of style Pokemon.
It's that kind of Zelda Link's Awakening / kind of Pokemon top down look, isn't it? Which I love
the plot as well. Basically, Fraser's just trying to organise a house party, but Daphne then goes to bed. He has to try and get his dad out of the house and get the place ready. Then he realises he's got to do his radio show in the middle of it as well. And it's got great music. A Game Boy rendition of the Frasier theme tune.
Plus salad and scrambled eggs.
Yeah, so it is incredible. And it's funny to think, because I was trying to think before, there wasn't any Frasier games back in the day, was there? But it would have made a really good point-and-click adventure game out of
Well, the
Frasier.
thing was, the whole set and stuff, people got obsessed with it. I remember people were doing, recreations of the apartment. That was one particular thing in it. And that's where you start, obviously, in the game straight away. And, people talk about set designs as well. And apparently that's one of the really amazing ones. But it is just basically a Frasier game set in his world. And, of course, creating a disastrous dinner party is pretty much a staple for Frasier. He's probably done about like 200 dinner parties and ruined them,
Yeah, so it looks really cool, and it is available for free to play on your original hardware, or there is a little web player as well, so you can play it in your browser, so definitely worth checking out. Now, Joe will be very excited about this news. Obviously, we're talking about the new Mario movie when that landed back in the summer. Was it this year or last year? But anyway, 30 years ago as now... did you go and see it at the cinema, Joe, when you were little? Did you go and see the Super Mario Brothers 93 movie?
I didn't. I can tell you exactly where I was. I think it must have been Christmas, I want to say 95. And I think it was definitely Christmas Eve. And it was the, the TV premiere of Super Mario Bros. On TV. And right. I remember it. I remember it so well, me and my brother watching it. And like I say, we loved it. We had no problem with it whatsoever. I even remember...
Your favourite film ever, isn't it?
One of my favourite films ever, absolutely. And, I even remember we have a tradition in my family growing up that you always got a present on Christmas Eve. And I remember what present it was. It was a gargoyle toy from the TV show Gargoyles, which has recently been re-released and everything as well. It's funny how these things come full circle after 30 years. But yeah, Super Mario Bros. 1993 live-action film is getting a 4K anniversary release. And I know, Ravi, you said, a lot of these films come out and stuff like that, but it was just funny because it's Super Mario Bros. And it's such a terrible movie, and it's funny because it's like, I was looking at it, and the first film, this one, had a $40 million budget and it made $39 million at the box office.
Lost money.
So it lost money, $100,000. And the new one has grossed $1.3 billion so far.
Bit of a difference then.
It's just insane. But yeah, this is coming from Umbrella Home Entertainment. And they're going to be releasing in January 2024, which is quite funny because it's the 30th anniversary for it and it's actually coming out next year. But it's going to be a hell of a collection. So it's going to cost $100. And it's going to come in a huge box that obviously includes the 4K Ultra HD version of the movie. But there's going to be 3 discs. So you get 2 extra Blu-rays in there, which are going to have behind the scenes, kind of documentary on there, behind the scene book, included with film cells, posters, stickers, artwork cards. There's all new recorded audio commentary for the film. And there's also going to be, they've restored all the deleted scenes in the trailers for the film as well.
Yeah, sorry. But, when they do these as well, they don't, a few of them are done as upscales. This isn't an upscale. So they've got the original 35mm print.
Yeah. And
they've also rescanned it from that. So they've, and that will have those deleted scenes in there as well. And they've also remixed it for 5.1 as well.
Oh, nice.
So, this is like prime 4K Ultra HD release. And if you've got the equipment and if you've got a player, it's absolutely amazing to see. But I do think it is quite expensive.
It is expensive. Yeah, it's massively expensive. It's just a fun novelty, and people will probably, the fans will buy it. The everyday man probably won't pick it up for that kind of money. Yeah. But the old, the fans of the classic will no doubt pick it up and pre-order it and stuff like that. And it's probably going to, I would imagine it's probably going to see a relatively limited release and probably
it's got quite a few things that you'd enjoy, Joe, which is it's got Trust the Fungus Big Collector's Pack, which has a rigid outer slipcase. It has a scripts book as well.
Oh, nice.
Behind the scenes book, souvenir magazine, reversible posters, lobby cards as well. A film cell comes with it as well, a genuine cell from the actual film, and a sticker sheet as well. So, it comes with quite a lot of stuff, and they've got like different, levels of packs that you can get, like collector's edition bundle and stuff.
You know what? I don't think Joe needs a script booked anyway. I bet you can talk along to the film, can't you? Watch it that much.
I've probably seen it like 3 times.
Yeah, one
Joe's
this
probably
week.
wrote his own script for the second
Yeah, the
movie.
sequel. The sequel that never happened.
It is. Obviously, it was a bit of a laughing stock back in the day. And today, I think it's kind of got that reputation of being so bad that it's kind of good. You know, it's definitely got a cult following, hasn't it? So nice to see it getting some love, and a collector's edition 4K re-release coming soon. So I'm going to check that out. I'll put that and all the rest of the stories in our show notes at theretrohour.com. Now, next weekend, it is going to be a final weekend of October. I can't believe how quickly the months are going by, but that does mean we're going to continue our 400th episode celebrations into this month's Patrons Hangout. Now, for people that maybe haven't been on the Hangout before, it's always so much fun, isn't it, when we get into this time of year, you know, because obviously we always talk about kind of horror stuff near Halloween, and then Christmas party will be coming up in a couple of months as well. And we've got a great crew, and there's going to be people who join us for the first time for the Christmas ones this year who weren't on, you know, our Patreon last year. So if you'd like to join the community, now would be a very good time to do it. You're looking forward to the 400th party then that we're going to have with the patrons?
I'm going to get the drinks in. I'm going to set the credit card up, buy some games like I always do online. No, I'm really looking forward to it. And like you say, we don't want to kind of be like, you know, gloating or kind of like, you know, what was the word you used at the start of the show? Just kind of like glorifying ourselves. You know, we really, really, really do appreciate, you know, that people do still listen to us, still support us, people still sponsor us and all that kind of stuff. And yeah, it's just amazing, and it does put it into perspective, you know, the voicemails and stuff like that. And yeah, it's, you know, when I talk about the podcast to people at work and people don't really get it, I try, I do a little bit of a podcast, you know, bit of a thing that I do on, you know, do on the side and stuff. But you know what, it means so much more to us.
And it makes it real as well. Like, you know, we're sitting in a room staring at a wall, shouting at a microphone, you know, but actually interacting with people and having a whole crew and you know, video and just the support as well. It just is, it's absolutely amazing, you know, and it's hard to connect in your head until you actually do something like that and go out and meet people and hear people's voices and stuff.
Yeah, and, you know, we just love the Hangouts as well. So if you'd like to join us for next week's Hangout, that is coming up next Sunday evening, 8 p.m. UK time. All the details to sign up will be on our Patreon page. You can head to theretrohour.com, follow the links there. You also get a lot of other perks as well. You get an ad-free version of the podcast every week. It's longer. You get an extra 2 or 3 news stories every single week. And also we're about to record our latest episode, number 38, of our patrons-only podcast, The Retro Hour After Hours, where we're going to be going back to the year 1995. So if you want to get that in your podcast feed this weekend, sign up on Patreon right now. All the details are at theretrohour.com, and hopefully you can help us reach another 400 episodes of this show. And of course, when we do get new patrons, we induct them into the most prestigious high score table in the world of retro gaming, and that is the Retro Hour Hall of Fame. So let's induct our newest members.
Hall of Fame!
And the first one in there this week is a gold member, actually. Welcome to Fabio,
Andy Aldrich,
Paul Bullard,
and Brian Downey, who all joined us on Patreon over the last week or two. And if you'd like to join them and get access to all the stuff that we do on our patrons, hangouts and everything like that, all the details to sign up right now are at theretrohour.com. Right, we're going to chat to this week's special guest, the first of an epic 2-part interview all about the legendary SCUMM Engine with Aric Wilmunder. He's coming up in just a moment. Before we do that, let's take a second to give a massive thank you to this week's sponsor, and that is our wonderful friends at Shopify. Now, if you use Shopify, this sound will be music to your ears. You know what that means, Ravi?
made a sale.
That's it. That means you've made money on Shopify. Now, we've talked about this before, that Shopify it's basically the all-in-one commerce platform where you can start, run, and most importantly, grow your business as well. Because I don't know about you guys, it feels like everyone's doing some kind of like side hustle at the moment, or maybe even becoming your own boss as well. And Shopify basically takes care of all the stuff that you probably don't want to handle. Now, you've done web development for a living, Ravi, setting up, how much of a hassle is it setting up, traditional kind of e-commerce platforms yourself? It is like a nightmare.
An absolute nightmare, yeah. And especially when you've got point of sale systems and, all-in-one commerce, it can be a nightmare to set up yourself. And the great thing with Shopify is it does it all, and you can share your selling across all social media platforms as well, and you've got a 24/7 help.
Yeah, which I think that in itself, is just worth the price, isn't it? Not having to deal with calls from customers and stuff yourself and support them. And they've got an extensive business course library on there. They are ready to basically support your success every single step of the way. And it covers all these sales channels, shop ready, point of sale systems, e-commerce, even in person as well. And like you said, across all the social media marketplaces, Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok too. And, I've used Shopify. I've actually been using it recently with a friend of mine who runs a t-shirt printing business. And we've set it all up on there for him. And he's selling like some Christmas t-shirts on there. He's started to sell a load of them over the last couple of weeks.
My friend's got a wrapping paper business. And he started to do that. And also mug printing as well. That was another one.
Yeah, and a friend of mine a couple of years ago, I mentioned it before, he's an author and he's trying to do it all like on WordPress before selling stuff, set him up on Shopify, took all the hassle out of it and basically let him do what he loves, which is writing books. So that's the great thing about Shopify. No matter how big you want to grow, they'll be there to empower you and give you the confidence that you need to take your business to the next level. So if you want to hear a lot of this, why don't you set yourself up on Shopify right now? And of course, we've got you an incredible offer for just £1 a month. You can try out Shopify yourself. So head to this website right now, shopify.co.uk/retro hour. All one word, all lowercase, shopify.co.uk/retro hour. And of course, that will let them know that we've sent you there as well. It really helps out the podcast and take your business to the next level today with our friends at Shopify. And we thank them for their support of our show. Right then, before we hop into the interview, do you want to hear a bit more love, guys? Some more love from our lovely listeners?
Let's do it.
Hi, this is Terje Høybakk. Been listening ever since I saw you at Retromessa, or Retrospillmessa as it was then. It was the first year you were there, I think. I had to check out what this Retro Hour thing was. Had never heard of it before, and it turned out to be this great podcast with great interviews. And hey, that's what it still is. So cheers for the 400, guys, and I'm hoping for hundreds more.
Hey everyone, Niels and Wheels here. Congratulations, Retro Hour, on your 400th episode. I realised I've been listening to you for about 4 years now, and ever since then I've been experiencing Dan's Commodore Plus 4 adventures, Ravi's Wii U mods, and Joe getting excited about another Resident Evil remake. So keep up the good work, and I look forward to episode 500.
So 400 episodes? Oh man, I thought that this podcast was going to fade into obscurity, just like many other retro podcasts, just released from this mortal coil at like 25 episodes. Well, good job. As the cows in Earthworm Jim say, well done.
Wow, episode 400, guys. Well done. It feels like only 5 minutes ago since we're at episode 300. Hopefully there'll be many more to come. Keep up the good work, guys. It's fantastic to hear the show every week, and thank you for keeping us all sane over the years, and hopefully, as I said, many more to come. Thanks for having me on the show as well. It's been great fun doing that with you guys, and I'm looking forward to hearing more from you in the future.
Happy 400, fellas. I'm still waiting for an episode devoted to Tutankhamun, but in the meantime, keep cranking them out, and love the show. From Australia, it's Andrew. Thanks for everything you guys do. See ya.
Hello, fellas. This is Sean Holly from the 10 Pence Arcade podcast. Congratulations on reaching 400 episodes. You are definitely the second best retro games podcast behind ours I've ever listened to. Am I kidding? Yeah, well done, guys. Have a good one, and hope to listen to another 400 where we'll all be 80. Cheers, mate. I love you. Bye.
Hey guys, it's Chris Winter. Just wanted to just thank you for everything you guys do on the Retro Hour. Been listening for a few years now, and it's just made Fridays bearable. You just became part of my lifetime routine in terms of listening in the background whilst I work and just grind my way through a Friday at work. And you guys just continue to do a fantastic and extremely professional job and are just inspirational. Yep, love it. Love the interviews. Love the way you cover so much news in so little time. And congratulations on episode 400. That's amazing. All right, keep it up. Cheers.
Oh, thank you, Chris. And yeah, lots of familiar voices in that little montage as well. So, and lots of them from so many different places too. One thing I love about this podcast, you know how international we are with our audience?
The World Wide Web. I love it.
So more of those voicemails a bit later on in the show. But of course, thank you so much for leaving them. Everyone who was kind enough to leave us a little good luck message. Thank you very much for that. You know, little tear in the eye now after listening to those. So more of those coming up at the end of the podcast. If you did leave one and you haven't heard yours yet, then keep listening. But of course, before that, we have got the main event though, as we kick off probably the most in-depth interview we've ever done. The first of our epic two-parter with the Scum Lord himself, Aric Wilmunder, is next on the Retro Hour podcast. You're listening to the Retro Hour podcast, and it is time to welcome on this week's very special guest. And what an honour it is to speak to our guest this week. As you know, Ravi and I, huge fans of adventure games. Grew up, my childhood memories playing LucasArts and Lucasfilm games back in the day. Some of my fondest childhood memories, and it's all made possible thanks to our guest today, who was the co-creator of the legendary SCUMM Engine, often known informally as the Scum Lord. Let's welcome on this week's very special guest, Aric Wilmunder. How's it going, Aric?
Oh, it's going great. Thank you so much for having me here.
Really appreciate you taking the time to come on and not only share some memories with us, but also join us for the episode 400 celebrations as well. So nice to have you here.
Oh, I'm quite honored to be here, and congratulations on 400 episodes.
Yeah, thank you very much. It's been a wild ride so far, so long may it continue. Now, before we get into some of the incredible games that you've worked on, I mean, it's always nice to kind of go back to day one with our guests and kind of find out, where the journey all began for you. So, I mean, do you remember your first ever computer or gaming experience, kind of where it all started?
I sometimes I think they say that the most important part is showing up, and I showed up in the right place. So I grew up in Silicon Valley. One of my neighbors was Doug Engelbart, who invented the mouse. And so I just sort of assumed that everybody had neighbors who worked on computers and invented, groundbreaking technologies in the industry. And as it turned out, my first real hands-on with computers was when I was about 12 years old. The school district in Palo Alto had ordered an HP 3000, and HP couldn't deliver it, but they could deliver a 2000. But a few months later, the 3000 showed up, so they gave the 2000 to the junior high, and one of the teachers decided to take a crack at teaching a programming class. So if you can imagine a bunch of 12-year-old kids typing away on teletypes in the afternoon. And then the real breakthrough is my dad found an old display monitor and an old modem, and my user and password would let me onto the system at night as well. So I would rewrite Star Trek, and I would write, we had one we called Overkill, which was basically, launching rocks at each other and trying to destroy each other's cities. And other of the 12-year-olds, we were all writing different things, and anything. We found I think it was David All had these basic computer game books, and anything we could find, we would type in. And I actually wrote some things the teacher asked me to remove because they started to show up around campus. It was like a Mad Lib, but it would generate phrases I'd found in an old Playboy magazine. Nice. And, so we agreed. It was funny. My friend Alan and I, the teacher called us in after school, and he commented about, what would your parents think? So, well, my dad would have killed me. And Alan's response was, oh, my dad thinks it's great. I learned about string manipulations. I learned about random numbers. I learned about, sentence construction, all these things that the teacher had been trying to teach us in class. And we were applying them just in a way that they didn't necessarily approve of.
So you must have got like a lot of experience then, because people mainly in educational settings would have to get access to the computers, and you had that kind of remote dialing up, which must have really led to you, homing in your programming skills.
Well, what it let me do is, though, there was Star Trek, which was this very basic game. You had long-range scans, and you had scans of I think they were your local quadrant scans, and you could fire torpedoes. And so I started with that as a basis, but I quickly learned that there were actually commands on this monitor that my dad had found in a junkyard and gotten it fixed up that would move the cursor. You could set the cursor position. So I started rewriting that game, and long range scan would always be in the upper left-hand corner, and the quadrant scan would be up in the right-hand corner. And anytime it went to display text, it would display it in the lower half. So it was completely customized. It would only work on this computer and on this monitor. But it sort of taught me how to begin to manipulate, screen space and how to modify other people's programs. And then I would go and I'd write new weapons for it. So I had I think I called it a Nova bomb or something like that. So if a Klingon was hiding behind a sun in one of the quadrants, I could actually cause the sun to go Nova, and it would chain react and destroy any Klingons that happened to be in the vicinity when it went off. So, anything that, if you can imagine, a 12-year-old would think about doing, this was my sandbox, and I just had as much fun as I could with it.
Well, I know that you put yourself through college writing games, and you were involved with automated simulations. I believe later went on to become Epics. How did that involvement happen then, and how did you start writing games commercially?
I came home one summer, so it must have been the summer of my sophomore year, and I probably had been a month at home and hadn't, done anything. And I think it was my mom told me that I should go find a job. And I went to the back of one of the computer magazines that I got, and there were two companies. One was Strategic Simulations that was nearby, and I contacted them, and they said, "Oh, sure, we could arrange something. Can you come by next week?" And then I called Automated, and they said, "Oh, could you come by this afternoon?" So I went with the one that was nearby. They had been the two founders, so Jim Connolly and John Freeman were the game designers there. And they'd written primarily on TRS-80s, but had written in BASIC. And so I had lots of familiarity with BASIC from my days working on the HP systems. I don't remember if I'd already previously played around with Atari 800s. Before then, I'd actually played on an Exidy Sorcerer, which is a Z80-based processor. And they would basically set me up with a machine and I think a floppy drive, and gave me the TRS-80 code and said, "Hey, let's see what you can do with that." So during the last month or two of my summer vacation, I think I'd finished the first game and got started onto the second game. And then they would fly me up from LA where I was in college, and I would just bring floppy disks, and it's like, here's the latest one, and people would go through and play them and test them. And I have to say how fortunate I was, because, the very first one I did all the sounds, I did all the graphics, I did all the programming. And then by the second one, I think they said, they probably looked at the art, and it's like, we'd really like to team you up with an artist. And they teamed me up with Paul Ritchie, who since then, it was one of the ushers at my wedding, but he went on to start Toys for Bob. So all the, I think Star Control and Murder on the Zindernoof, and all the games where basically you'd put your plastic toy on the portal, and your characters would go into the game and things like that. That's all the work that Paul had developed at Toys for Bob. So he now became my artist, and so that just really taught me, the benefits of working with people on a team. Is, when you looked at the first game I worked on, my main character, when standing around, looked like a dead cactus. And when he was flying in his rocket suit, looked like a live cactus. And then when we went on and did Crush, Crumble, and Chomp, which was sort of a version of The Creature That Ate Sheboygan, the board game, but you would play the Godzilla type character and the King Kong type character and go into cities. And basically, at the start of the game, you'd be going against civilians and then policemen and police cars. And then as the game progressed, you'd be going up against, infantrymen and tanks. And pretty much you were always going to lose, but how long could you make it last? And whether you could, how much of the city you could engulf in flames. But Paul did the artwork for that. And that was just light years beyond what I was able to do. So during a year or so of college, I think I did close to a dozen games and expansion packs. And what was funny at the time is I remember going to a presentation and being told something like, well, if you with a degree in computer science, because at the time I was an electrical engineer.
Yeah.
And they were saying, a degree in computer science, you might earn $25,000 a year. And I was kind of going, well, I'm making about twice that, and I'm just doing it part-time. Imagine if I did this full-time.
Yeah. Wow.
And it was pretty amazing as well, because they packaged the games like, real games. At the time, other people were kind of packaging them in bags and,
Yeah, Xerox a manual. And here we had box covers and we had real artists. I think I may have the name wrong. I think it might have been George Barr. I think did a lot of the cover art for the boxes, and the back of the boxes had pictures of what the games looked like. And it wasn't a decade ahead of the industry, but it certainly was ahead of the industry. And there were a couple times which were fun where, when a new game would come out, when I was in the Bay Area, it's like, okay, hey, we're doing a big production run. And I'd go down into the warehouse with everybody from the company, and we'd be building the games, ourselves, and putting the discs in while the discs were, the disc copying machines were running. So I got to sort of see what the manufacturing side was in the game industry as well.
Well, what fascinated you so much about cinema? I know you joined USC, and there were a lot of kind of influential people in the film industry hanging around there. What was it like to be in that environment?
My freshman year, as I mentioned, I started EE. My dad was an electrical engineer. He worked for Stanford on the linear accelerator, where they were firing various particles down a 2-mile tube to see what would happen when they hit targets and they'd come apart. So he wanted me to follow in his footsteps. I had initially been signed up as EE and then switched to computer science. And at the same time, I was fascinated with cinema. And what's funny about it is I didn't really discover cinema until my teens. I think I could name the 6 movies I saw as a child because it was such a rare occasion. And then when I became a teen and started working, we would, I sort of discovered the cinema, which was a wonderful time. It's like, when Jaws was coming out, and, it's like, I sort of look at the 60s and the early 70s as kind of, the doldrums of the movie industry. And then there was some amazing stuff going on in the 70s. And so here I was in LA at USC, at the, walking by the cinema school all the time, and in a dorm with a bunch of people who were cinema students. And the first thing I noticed is that they would all be doing their projects in our building and looking for people to be extras and cast members and things like that. So they were, a very animated bunch. And so at one point I was approached and asked if I could do some special effects for their movies and to do credits on the computer screen that would scroll off. And so I did a few of those. And then I learned more about the cinema classes. And so I just would go over and audit the classes. It was seeing behind the scenes. It was so amazing. So I think it was Arthur Knight taught what we called it either Tuesday night or Thursday night at the movies, because they would have the whole theater and he would bring in a guest. So he would bring in Sam Jones, who was in Flash Gordon, or LQ Jones, who was in The Wild Bunch. Steve Martin brought Pennies from Heaven. Jack Lemmon brought Missing. I think it was Gary Kurtz brought in Empire Strikes Back a couple months before it came out theatrically. And what was amazing is you'd get to watch the movie and then they'd take Q&A for an hour and a half or so. And this was everything I'd wanted to know. My dad was actually friends with Walt Disney's brother Roy. As a kid, I remember wanting to go to Disneyland, but instead being dragged down to the Disney studios and actually seeing them making the Jungle Book, and getting a tour of the animation department and seeing footage from that. And so for me, this was the closest thing to seeing what the movie industry was like. And it was always an area that I had a lot of interest in and passion for. And so then the crossover, both at Atari, where we had relationships with the Lucas companies, and then the Lucas companies themselves, was sort of like the accumulation of all the things that I dreamed and hoped for.
It sounds like you had some really good insight there. I mean, how did those kind of worlds come together, though, like the video game world and cinema? What was that kind of relationship, the connection at the time like?
It was interesting because, for example, when I was at Atari, it mostly involved licensing. And so I remember one day Clint Eastwood was walking around because we were doing a Firefox game based on his movie. I think the most interesting part was where, Atari had put up $1 million or $2 million, had put up some seed money to start the games group at Lucas. And so I got a chance to sort of, see these guys going by within the Atari organization, and got to know them sort of casually and saw some of their work, which was fascinating. And what it showed me was there was this place where you could sort of meld these two things, because I'd never really seriously thought of myself as going into the movie industry, and yet the technologies were all coming together. If you look at the breakthroughs in special effects going on in the Star Wars movies, it was all about computer-controlled models and computer-controlled cameras, and so you could repeat a scene. So you'd be flying a camera by a spaceship with just the engines on, and you'd run it by again where it would have other lighting, and then you'd run it by again, and you could create the matte, which would then be used to separate that spaceship and the lighting from the stars and everything else behind it. And so there was this interesting merger of the technologies where computers were getting involved more and more in cinema. So what I got to see with the Lucas companies when I joined there was that not only was so much of the special effect work being technically driven, David Fox, who was one of the original members of that group, had actually shared an office with Lauren Carpenter, who created the Genesis planet evolving effect from Wrath of Khan, that apparently, it was so good. I think they used it 3 times in other movies. Now the Klingons were interested in it in the next movie, but that was all based around fractals. There was a concept there, which was, the two groups, sort of the movie group and the games group, and we were always very jealous, but we put them up on pedestals. We had very high opinions of them, and it was fascinating because we got the opposite, which is, they were working, they could spend an entire day generating an effect for a movie, and we were trying to generate an image on a screen every 15th of a second. And they thought that was remarkable. And so it kind of tickled that, we both had this amazing mutual respect for each other, and maybe a little bit of imposter syndrome, like, oh, we're not worthy of what you guys do. But finding out that that respect was mutual and went both ways led to my first project there, which was working on the Fractal engine and getting fractals running on I guess the Atari 800 was like a 1.7 megahertz processor. And I don't think you'd even have one of those around your house anymore. Things are now running 1,000 times faster with GPUs alongside them doing the graphics. So
was that for Star Raiders? Star Raiders 2?
That work was on for... Dave did the original work on Rescue for Fractalus. I worked on a piece called Coronis Rift. But Star Raiders 2 was an interesting project. I joined Atari. I had 2 job offers after college. One was to go to NASA to work on an airborne observatory. I think it was the Kuiper Airborne Observatory. It was like a 707 or 727 with a telescope inside it. And then the other one was to go work for Atari in corporate research. And that was really my long-term dream, was, going there, because I was expecting to see, programmers in white lab coats standing behind, one-way mirrors, watching game players so we could sort of study them and learn how to make games. And it wasn't at all like that. We were writing the games we wanted to make for ourselves that we thought would be fun.
And Atari had actually fronted some money for like R&D with George Lucas back then.
Correct. So they had put up money, and that was, so my 2 years at Atari, 1 year was in corporate research, where I was working on a game called Gossip, which had an interesting model behind it. It was You were basically trying to be a popular person. This was a design that had been brought to me to execute. The model was like a 3-dimensional series of points in space, each with springs under different tensions, and then you'd make moves which would change the tensions of the springs, and you'd throw it up in the air and it would get to some new equilibrium. Well, that was not exactly what I had dreamed of for games. And so after I'd got it running, I was planning to take my girlfriend, now my wife, to Europe for 6 weeks. But before I left, CoinOp had heard about projects I was doing on my spare time, which was making rotating planets and flying spaceships and flying over terrain. And so they brought me over into CoinOp, where I worked on Star Raiders 2. So I worked on that for close to a year. And unfortunately, at the same time, Atari had bought the license for Last Starfighter. And there was a team that was working on a game based on Last Starfighter. And there were, I think, 4 or 5 people on that team. I was a sole programmer working on my project. Well, when Last Starfighter didn't do well in the theaters, they needed to rebrand it. And so here I was working on Star Raiders 2. Well, they rebranded Last Starfighter as Star Raiders 2. And it was like, that was a blow. And then at the same time, I think when I joined Atari, there were about 8,000 employees, and they kept on having, cuts and layoffs. I think they were down to about 500 employees when my number came up. So the benefit, though, was I was able to use that work in 3D models and everything else for what I thought was just a dog and pony show at the Lucas companies, but it turned out they were interviewing me. They just hadn't told me. They asked me to come up and show them some of my 3D work. And so I came up for an afternoon. And then about a week later, they asked me if I wanted to work there. So I asked when they would like to interview me. And they said, "Oh, we already did. Yeah, will you accept the offer?" So probably the easiest interview I've ever had.
Yeah, I was going to say the planets aligned for you a bit there, I think, didn't they?
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, at what point did you meet Ron Gilbert then? I mean, and do you remember your initial impressions of Ron?
Ron, I think, came on very shortly after I did. So Noah Falstein, who I think has been on one of your podcasts, had done a design for a game originally titled Alien Technology. I think that was just a working game. But the idea was you're going down to these planets and they're alien war machines, and you're collecting technology from these different tanks and flying saucers. And Ron came in pretty shortly after I was there, maybe as short as a month or 2 months. And Ron was going to work on the Commodore 64 version. I was going to work on the Atari 800 version. And Ron had a pretty amazing background. He'd worked, I think, for a company called HES, Human Engineering Software, something like that. And he'd worked on extensions to the Commodore 64 BASIC. So he had learned quite a bit about interpreters and such, which was an area which I wasn't that familiar with. But, he was a lot of fun to work with. We shared an office for, I don't know, half dozen years, quite a long time. And we have very different personalities. Ron is, really amazing public speaker, very dynamic. One time one of our coworkers was going to be giving a demo at a computer club in Berkeley. And so we decided, let's go along and we'll watch. And we were halfway over the bridge to Berkeley, and I was driving, and Ron said, "Isn't that Jim's car pulled over?" And we went there, and Jim had a flat tire. And so we were trying to figure out if he could use my tire, and Jim just said, I can't leave my car here. Can you give the demo? So he hands us a box of floppy disks, and we show up at this club meeting, and Ron just did an amazing job. He just chatted away while I popped in floppy disks and just did directories to see what I could find and ran whatever I could or displayed whatever artwork we could find. And it was an incredibly well-received presentation that was entirely off the cuff.
Wow.
Ron had worked at a radio station at his college town. They had a small college radio station. And so he was doing the morning show. So he was very fast on his feet conversationally.
He brought that energy.
Exactly. Yeah. I think one of his characters was named Jacques Strupp.
Nice.
Yes.
Well, I mean, let's talk about some of the projects that you worked on at Lucasfilm. I mean, one really revolutionary and very cutting-edge game was a Habitat, which I believe was actually the first attempt ever at a large-scale commercial virtual community, what we call today a MMORPG game. And that was really ambitious, working with Quantum Leap, which was the precursor to AOL that ran on the Commodore 64 platform. So what do you remember about working on that project, and how did that develop, and how did that benefit the development of what would become the SCUMM engine?
You know, there were a lot of parallels there. So the team on the Lucas side was Chip Morningstar, who's still probably, you know, one of the most talented and skilled programmers that I know. Randy Farmer, who another wonderful person, and so Chip was primarily focused on building the system, and so the global world. Randy was focused initially on the telecommunication side, so getting the modems working and getting things talking between the Commodore 64s and the computers in Virginia. My job was the graphics engine, and so, you know, I was taking everything we had in our pantry. So we had an animation system which we had used on and had developed on projects like Labyrinth, and is one by Charlie Kellner, where you went around inside caves. Oh, the Eidolon. So Charlie had built a cell animation system, and the cell being based around traditional animation cells that you might find in a Disney or a Warner Brothers, where, for example, you could have a set of walking legs, and then you could put a torso cell on top of that, and then you could put arm cells that are swinging back and forth. And the primary concept, and then put a head on top. So the primary concept there was you could save a lot of room because you can mix and match the arms and the legs and the torsos with and the different heads. You could mix and match these parts, and then and get them to work together. And then basically it had a very simple programming language for animating those. So my role was initially getting the animation system working on the characters, and then building a system for drawing the backgrounds. And the Habitat backgrounds were a little tricky because the Commodore 64, which, you know, it wasn't the first machine I'd worked on. I'd worked on the Atari 800. So I sort of had to teach myself the C64, had different ways to manipulate and use different colors with an additional data layer that you didn't see. It's hard to describe, but it allowed you to take certain colors and you could use them in certain places on the screen by writing into a secondary color plane. But all of that secondary plane was on very big boundaries. It's like on character size boundaries. So getting that system to work so you could design the world and minimize the amount of data necessary to have to send that data down from the main servers, and then building the world. And so as I got the animation system done and the background system done, then I sort of became the natural person to start building the world. And as I pointed out, I'm not an artist. So we had artists drawing the things in the world, and I was just using them as building blocks to develop the world. And I have to say, though, many months into that, we had set it up so we could teach other people how to build the world. And that's when the project really opened up for me, because it went from a world where I knew everything. So it's like, you know how the movie's going to end because you've read the book, so that maybe the movie's not as interesting. Yeah. In my case, I had seen the world, I'd built the world. And for me, the real interest cranked up when we actually got to see the users building the world. And my goal all along had been, for example, we gave each user an inside of a house that they could rearrange their furniture, and an outside they could rearrange. But I always thought that the turnstile could be the most interesting part, where as you generate money, you can buy more world, whatever that is, regions in our case. And you could do interesting things with these. But you put a turnstile out in front, and people can basically buy their way into this piece of terrain that you've built. And let the users build the terrain and let them make it interesting. And then the economy is there. The more that they can generate from turnstiles, from people visiting their interesting world that they've generated, the the more world that they can buy, and then they could hire gardeners to put in their trees, and they could, they could hire architects to design, so let the economy of the world build itself out for the future. And then one of the key things, though, there was we were really given a lot of free rein to innovate. And the original Habitat design docs was basically one male, one female avatar. And so the first thing I did is I said, that's way too limiting, because we're going to have, a half dozen characters on the screen. We need to be able to detect them from one another. So the first thing I did is found a way to be able to pattern into their textures, so that you could have, checkerboard pants or striped pants or a blue shirt or a pink shirt, and then there were other things where when you'd pick up an object, because we had the cell-based technology that could offset subsequent cells. Like if you carried something, I put in flags. So, boxes you would carry with your arms straight out. But if you had a magic wand, your arm would swing back and forth. But then the final thing was, we want even more variety. And since everything was built by attaching things to other things, one day I took the head off the avatar and had the artist draw me a different head. And I found a way to basically be able to attach it. So now you can not only customize your character, male, female, change their height, change the texture of their clothing, you can now completely change your character. And I think even the final step was replacing your avatar entirely. So instead of it being a walking, talking person, it could be a little wind-up penguin, or I created this spider that it would actually wear the avatar heads. And it was, I think I'd seen the Thing with Kurt Russell in it, where there's that nasty, the alien turns into like this spider with human, with human features on it. I thought, that'd be kind of fun. And what was interesting is years later, I was brought in by ILM. They were putting a bid together for Snow Crash, which was basically, imagine that one of the precursors to Ready Player One. Mm. And I was being brought in as a consultant for, what would the avatars be like? And my view was, you cannot go far enough. Yeah. If you can imagine it, somebody will design that someday. Whether it's designed to offend you, to entice you, to humor you, it's basically, think of it like a Halloween costume contest, where every time you turn, you're going to see something else amazing.
Do you think that the kind of background and interest in film helped, visualize and develop the engine with stuff like actors and scenes and, being able to create different costumes and having that kind of structure in film and then applying that to an engine so other people could use it easily?
Well, I think that segues well into SCUMM, because that was really, the some of the basis as the SCUMM system was being developed. So Ron and I were again sharing an office together during that development time. And there were even aspects where, if you look at the SCUMM language itself, it is almost like writing a movie script. If you look at a script and you'll have all the characters' lines, but then in between the lines will be all the direction. The character walks over to the door. He opens the window, what it may be. And if you look at much of the structure of the SCUMM language, it is that, but in a programming manner. It's like walk Dr. Fred to door. It literally, that is what the language looks like. Say line Dr. Fred, here's some text, and that's what he'd say. Do animation Dr. Fred, reach for door handle, whatever. It's that type of language that was based around how you might direct, and do directorial scenes in a movie. And I remember at one point, I think Steve Arnold was the president of our group, and his background was, he'd been at Atari as well. He ran the Atari Program Exchange. His background was as a psychologist. And Ron was trying to figure out the crossing the line between interactive and non-interactive, because clearly the cinematic world is non-interactive. You're just watching it. But we were going into a world where you're walking characters around and doing things. But on occasion, you lose interactivity. And we had, I think, maybe even 3 or more layers or levels of interactivity where some, for example, when you would tell a character to go walk to a door or to open a door and they'd walk over to it and they'd reach out and open it, you would have the interaction where, hey, when they're walking, you could still change their direction and things like that. But once they reached the door, the interactivity stopped for a second and then the scripting took over. So we would then trigger the animation to reach out for the door. We'd trigger the animation for the door to open. We'd trigger the sound effect for the door sound for the door opening. We'd trigger the character steps through and then arrives on the other side. But there were various layers we could do it, where some of them we'd leave the cursor still on the screen. So it almost still felt like, oh, I'm still driving this character, even though for that brief period of time, your ability to interact with the characters had been taken away. Other times, for example, in Maniac Mansion, when you'd ring the doorbell, you'd cut to another room inside the house and you would see, I forget if it was Weird Ed or Dr. Fred, somebody would be in their room doing something, and then they'd get up and you'd see them walking through the house. And you could actually begin to learn what the interior of the house looked like by watching, the characters walk through it themselves. And in those scenes, you had no interaction at all. So you take the cursor away entirely as you'd watch those, the other characters walking through the house. And so I remember Ron trying to figure out, well, what do you call that? What do they call that in movies? Well, they don't call that anything in movies because movies are non-interactive. You're always non-interactive. And so if you go to a scene, you just film another scene. But the comparisons we were looking for at the time were like, well, when you're playing Ms. Pac-Man and you just finished a level, and then you get this scene where, Ms. Pac-Man is animating, being chased with a ghost, and then she'd eat, a power pill or whatever and turn around and chase the ghost. And really it was like a break for you as the player. But I think Steve Arnold just said, well, you're cutting away from this and it's a scene. Well, let's just call it a cut scene. And basically it was just an invented term. There was no term used for that prior to that question being asked. And Steve just came up with a word that made sense. And that ended up going into both the language and sort of the vernacular for what do you call a non-interactive scene, in an interactive video game.
I'm interested in the kind of the backstory and on the development of SCUMM as well. Because how important was it to use assembly language and C to obviously speed up the engine, but also offer some standardization there? Because obviously it was running on different platforms.
Well, talking about the teams and assembly language, there's a very important aspect of that. And I mentioned Chip Morningstar, who I worked on with Habitat. And Habitat was written with every object was a little piece of assembly language. And assembly language is basically the lowest level that you can write to the processor. But every object is this thing that can be moving around in memory. So we had a system called a heap where you'd store all the things that are in a room, like all the costumes and the sound effects and the animations, and the rooms themselves would all get thrown into this chunk of memory. And every once in a while you might move things in memory because I need to take something out that's old so I can put something new in. So you had to write in this very specific way where you were always using offsets. Every time you wanted to get to an animation, you'd go and ask for the address of the animation, and then you'd go, okay, and I need this offset into that to get to this piece of information. But you always had to assume that while you ask for it, you own it, it's not going to move. But the minute that you free it up, it could be someplace completely different the next time you access it. So you always had to start your process of working with any of these objects by basically asking for their address. So what it meant was Habitat, using assembly language, any of that code could blow up very easily with a flaw. But I think one of the lessons from that was moving to SCUMM is Chip, and because Ron had the background in writing the extensions to the BASIC that was on the Commodore 64, Ron had the idea of, well, let's create a language for it. And so that's where the SCUMM language was created, where instead of these commands that the processor executes directly, you instead have what are called opcodes or operation codes, which are, here's a byte, and if the byte holds the number 27, a 27 is a command that says, I'm going to walk the actor someplace. So if you find a 27, then the next 2 bytes are the actor number, and then the next 2 bytes are the one X location, and the next 2 bytes are the Y location. And then your processor would come along and it would grab that 27 and go, what is my command? And it would go, oh, I go look it up in a table and I go execute the walk command. And the benefit of that was that there were only about 120 commands in the SCUMM language, but there were 256 possible values in a byte. So what it meant was half the commands didn't exist. So we could, anytime a command showed up and it was like, that's not below 120, that's a mistake, we could stop the processor and go, hey, there's a bug, let's figure out what the bug is. Where in Habitat, every command is a valid command. And so the only thing you knew was suddenly your computer would be crashing, but you couldn't track it back to where did that mistake happen. Where in SCUMM, because basically you had 50-50 odds that the command was either good or the command was bad, that you could very easily track back to when did it go south? Oh, okay, now I can debug that and debug that command and get it working. Where on Habitat, when something went bad, it usually meant you had to reboot the computer and try to repeat it and try to put debugging information into it so you could try to figure out what caused it to crash this time. So I've always felt like, Habitat could have sort of learned the future lesson from Habitat, and had been an interpreted language, would have been a tremendous savings. But you also asked about the benefits, and let me tell you this story, because your background with the Amiga, and so I was managing what we called cross-platform. So initially, we were developing for the Commodore 64. I did the first IBM PC version of Maniac, and then eventually, over time, we moved all of our tools, because our tools were based on the Sun workstations, which we had been developing our Atari 800 and Commodore 64 games. But eventually, the PC became powerful enough that we could run the compilers and the other tools on the PC. So we rewrote those tools to run on the PC. And what we would do is we'd work on the Amiga, the game itself is nothing more than data. The images on those floppy disks, there's a directory of, okay, here's the 127 costumes you have, the 200 sound effects you have, the 100 rooms you have. There's a directory of how to get to all of those. And some of them tell you to go to, if you want this sound effect, it's located in room 30, and it's this many bytes into room 30. So you could find all those assets, but it's all just data. And the great thing about going to the Amiga is the other thing that I managed is called the interpreter. And that's the thing that plays the game by reading and executing the data. So we had the SCUMM, which was technically the compiler that would tokenize the language into those byte commands. And then I wrote the interpreter that would take those tokens and turn them back into commands that the interpreter would execute, and then draw the characters and load the sound effects and load the rooms and execute the scripts. Actually, Ron wrote most of the scripting side of the executables there. I was mostly doing the drawing and loading and memory management and all the other aspects. But what it meant was the interpreter was this pretty small chunk of code. And so when we went from, say, the PC to the Amiga, that's all they had to rewrite initially to get their engine working. Was they didn't have to change the game. They didn't, just don't play the sounds. Just, but you can play the 16-color IBM PC artwork on the Amiga. We're going to redraw it. But before we redraw it, let's make sure that the game works. And then when we change the art, all we have to worry about is, hey, we know everything else is working. Let's make sure, now let's improve the art. So I had a really good engineer, Dan Filner, I think was the Amiga programmer at the time, and I'd give him the C code, which the game was based on. And so C is a higher level language. It's an object-oriented language, which just doesn't really mean anything to this conversation, but it was a powerful language. But then underneath it, you could write back an assembly language to make things faster. So something you wanted to optimize, you would handwrite at the computer level. But there was always this higher level C version that you would start with to make sure it worked. So I could give the code to the Amiga programmer and say, hey, just turn on all the C code, everything should work. And each day for a week or two, it was like, okay, here's this issue, because the Amiga stored data in a different order than the PC did. So we had to write sort of wrappers to flip the order of the bytes and things like that. So we'd write that code, and then we'd put it back in the PC side so that any issues we'd find on the Amiga would now end up in the parent code on the PC, so that we could fix that problem and it would go away for all future versions. And we went through this for about a week. It's like, okay, I'm getting a cursor working and getting the keyboard working. And then one day I just got a phone call, and from Dan, he's going, how do I get through the X in the library? And it took me a second going, what are you talking about? You know, what X and what do you, and I realized he'd actually played the game far enough where he was now playing the game. It's like once he got the interpreter working well enough, then the game is just, all that data, you can believe in it. We already built the game. It already works on our trusted tools. Now we just get this one small piece of code, the interpreter, on your computer, and then the game will just work. Then after it's there, then we can make all the enhancements, put in the Amiga digital sounds, put in the 32 color background art, redo the characters, do better music, etc. But initially, the key thing is getting a system that's solid, and we could start with all that data that we had, we already trusted before changing everything. It was a great way. So having that interpreted language meant that literally the game you had on the Amiga was the same game you had on the PC game-wise. Versus, I remember, I think it was CinemaWare did, what was the game? Rocket Ranger? They did one where, they did a flying game, and on the Amiga, great sound and great graphics. And then I remember seeing like the Commodore 64 version of it, and all it really was taking the name of the product and then go building, something else. And that's where, port is a 4-letter word, and that's literally what you were getting there. We were looking at building a game that took as much advantage of the platform as we could, which is why you mentioned earlier that you had 12 floppy disks on the Amiga version of Monkey Island, because we had a great game, and then we really wanted to make sure it was truly taking the best advantage of the hardware that was there.
Yeah, I mean, I bought a hard disk to play Monkey Island 2. It was because it was that fully featured. You're right. I mean, there's nothing cut out of it. It was the game that you got on the PC as well, and the power of SCUMM made it so it was possible to migrate between machines. And I think also the fact that the engine was so versatile as well. I mean, one of the other game that I loved back then was Loom, and we had Brian Moriarty on the podcast a couple of years ago as well, and that was a really interesting interface that game had. I mean, obviously that kind of changed the SCUMM engine up somewhat, because rather than having the usual commands that you had in many of the LucasArts games, you had that kind of that experimental interface where Bobbin actually played his spells on his staff. So what did you think of that title then, and the way that Brian used the SCUMM engine in that game?
I think that if I wanted anything, it would be for that game to be bigger. And I think that Brian had come over to us from, I think it was Infocom, where he'd worked on a lot of text-based games and amazingly creative projects with tremendous depth. I think he worked on Trinity, might have been one of the products he worked on. And I think when he moved over to using the SCUMM system, he wanted to do it all. He wanted to have the same amount of control that he had over a text-based game as he did over a graphics game. And that's like having a writer wanting to have the same amount of control over their book as they would if it was a movie. But a movie takes, hundreds of people and costume designers and musicians and all these other things. And so I think Brian was really trying to do as much as he could, and it's a super admirable job. I love the interface, the fact that it took, what SCUMM had developed as sort of as inventory management system and the verb interface, and turned it into basically turned spells into your inventory. And that's actually one of the areas that I probably would have liked to see, because I don't think Loom had it, which would have been a screen that shows you your inventory of spells that you have, and as you learn them, and a description of what each of these spells does, because then you could go, oh, okay, the system is learning these, and basically if it became your spell book. Now, it's been a long time, trust me, since I played Loom, but I would have, the same way you had an inventory screen where you could see, in the, I'm going to say more traditional SCUMM games, where you could see the items. And there's kind of a funny story about that. Because we had, in the early ones, we'd have the text description. It'd be great to have had the same thing true in Loom. But there was so much, he was really, really pushing the system hard, graphically, animation wise. I just, but it was his first project out the gate. And I would have loved to have seen a larger team on that, because yes, he was working with musicians and he was working with artists, but I think Brian really, tried to shoulder the burden of doing all of the scripting work on that on his own. And it probably would have really helped to have had, I think most of the other games would have a team of four scripters or more just filling things in. And I think that's where I think a lot of people find the depths in the SCUMM games was, the environments were so rich with objects, because you could very easily go, oh, there's the artist drew something up on the wall. Well, a scripter can come through really quickly and mark that item and give it a name, and you can read it, and they could write something funny about it, and it just makes the world that much more rich with all of these things. Even if they're not directly tied to the game, they're part of that game experience, which can lead to the all the hours of gameplay enjoyment. And I would have liked to have seen more of that. And the other thing is, I think there were a couple of other designs to continue on in that universe. I think there was a design concept for Forge, which was basically where Loom was the guild of the weavers. Forge was going to be the guild of the iron workers.
Yeah.
And there was going to be another character that in that same magical environment that was going to expand it. And that would have been really interesting to see, to sort of take and build on Brian's universe that he created, but then see how it could be expanded with new concepts there.
Yeah, I'm still hoping that one day he will do the follow-ups, because when we spoke to him, he said he's still got some ideas, so that would be incredible to finally see him follow up those stories one day.
And maybe it can be in a book form. I don't know. Yeah. I don't know what Brian's up to these days. Oh, but I was going to mention one way that the inventory system was kind of funny was, I forget which of the monkeys it was, but the first version of Monkey Island had text-based inventory. So it would say, key to the monkey ear or whatever.
Yeah.
But there was that whole joke in there where you pull the key to the monkey ear out of your pocket, and it's a giant Q-tip.
Yeah.
And then you go in and you clean the monkey's ears, and then that's what opens it up. Well, the problem was when we did the newer versions of that game, we had a graphical or an iconic interface, and I don't remember how we solved it, because you didn't want to display a Q-tip because it would give away the joke,
Yeah.
in the later game. Things evolve, and there are always, things that, the scripters would have to find ways to move around and learn around as the games evolved.
Well, Aric, I think that would be a really good place to pause things until next week, as obviously we're going to get more into those huge games that used the SCUMM Engine, Monkey Island, of course, the massive sequel, Monkey Island 2, and hear more about how it developed throughout the 90s until it got discontinued in 1997. So we'd love to have you back on next week to get part 2. But in the meantime, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you, and we'll hear more from you next week.
My pleasure as well. Thank you.
to Ravi, Joe and Dan on reaching 400 episodes of one of the best shows on the internet, The Retro Hour. I've been listening every week religiously for years now, never miss it. Got the best news, best guests, cannot knock it. But you are missing me. I think you should get me on to talk about how I managed to build my own retro 8-bit games console from scratch with no previous electronics experience. It's also the fastest 8-bit games console, that is the Usebox. So big congrats, guys. Here's to no 400 episodes. Thank you.
Hi, Dan, Ravi and Joe. Brett Alexander from Australia here. I started listening to your podcast at the start of the pandemic, and eventually I was able to become a Patreon supporter about a year ago. So I try and lurk on the Patreon's hangout as often as possible, but it's either 5 or 6 a.m. here when it starts, and I'm in no condition to be seen on camera and even speak coherently, but I still find it very enjoyable just to lurk and listen. Anyway, congratulations on the 400 episodes. I'm sure it's not easy to produce that number of episodes and make them all interesting, informative and entertaining, but somehow you guys do it every week, after week after week, so you should be very proud of that. So congratulations again, well done, and keep those episodes coming, as long as you guys still enjoy doing it.
Hello, this is Edwin van Roosenkamp, creator of BaseMX. Congratulations guys with recording your 400th episode. Not long, you'll be recording your 1000th, at which point the Retro Hour podcast possibly retro itself. Anyway, keep the good work going, and thank you for the great content you record. I love listening to your episodes, and I'm looking forward to what will come in the future. Thank you very much, guys.
Retro Hammer here. Congratulations, chaps. 400 episodes. Well deserved. Many more to come, I hope. You guys have worked your arses off since, well, how many years now? I've been listening since the, third, maybe fourth episode, and been enjoying the interviews, keeping up with the news, sent plenty of little news snippets in myself. Now enjoying the after hours episodes, and of course the monthly Patreon meetings that we're all having, which are a great crack. Been enjoying the episodes with the Patreon guys on there. You know, Ashley and all that lot doing bloody brilliant. You know, we might actually have a fourth member the way you guys are going. Either way, keep the hard work up, mate, and looking forward to listening to the 700th episode, and more to go, I hope. Take care, guys. Bye-bye.
Hi, Steve here from WaveM Studios, creators of the Commodore story and the Commodore 64 game Cosmic Force. Just want to say a big thank you to Dan, Ravi and Joe for 400 episodes of the Retro Hour. Absolutely awesome. Keep them coming, boys.
Hey, it's David here from the Geeky Guys podcast. Just wanted to congratulate you on 400 episodes of the Retro Hour podcast. You guys are superb. You're certainly our go-to for retro gaming news, and we love the guests that you have on as well. Absolutely fantastic. Love what you do. Here's to the next 400 more.
Hey Dan, Ravi and Joe. Cheeky Commodore Gamer here. Just want to say a big congratulations for reaching episode 400. You've interviewed some absolute retro legends over the years, and I'm looking forward to the next 400. All the best, guys.
Hi guys, I only discovered your podcast a couple of months ago, and I'm sort of making my way back through all the episodes, but I'm absolutely loving it. You give me these kind of time warp moments during an episode where one of you will say something like Gizmondo, and suddenly my mind travels back to 2005 when I was in Germany at CeBIT show, standing at the Gizmondo stand. Anyway, loving all the nostalgia. Keep it up. Cheers.
Oh well, hello. Håkon Puntervold from Norway here. Dan, Ravi, Joe, congratulations on 400 episodes, and thank you so much for making 400 episodes. I'll take a Jaeger bomb for that. But I would also like to take the opportunity to say that you guys are, without a doubt, one of my favorite podcasts. And the reason for that is because of the guests you get on the show and how you guys interview them. Because out of 400 episodes, I think it's maybe 300 names that I've never heard about. And to listen to their story and to let them tell their story by themselves through voice instead of some kind of interview on a news page, the podcast format is so much better. And thank you so much for doing all the work and getting the video game history out there through your podcast. And I'm really looking forward to episode 500, 600, 700, 800, 900, and especially number 1000. And again, thank you. Cheers, or as we say in Norwegian, skål. Goodbye.
Hello, Tommy here. I've taken a break in playing Demon's Crest on the SNES to congratulate Retro Hour on their 400th episode. A podcast that has given me so much, open insight and new information about this hobby that I love, and new friends that I really, really cherish. So this is me saying cheers for another 400 episodes. Ta!